Welcome, Logan. Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you? How is everyone doing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we are
fine.
fine as well.
Yeah, I'm glad we
Yeah,
got a chance to connect. Looking forward to this.
yeah. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your valuable time with us. So let me start with my introduction. I am Ayush. I am currently in my final year, pursuing bachelor's in computer science and engineering from MIT University, Noida. I have participated in Google Summer of Code in 2019 and 20 as well, with the organization named Fossology. Currently, I'm maintaining two of their projects, actively maintaining two of their projects, and alongside with that, I have filed three patents that are my personal projects. I'm working alongside with Sahil and one of our mentors, Kaushlen. And Sahil, can you introduce?
Yeah, sure. Ayush is my classmate, so that's a very big achievement. And I have worked with Alibaba Cloud in the Alibaba Summer of Code program. And in 2020, I was a Google Summer of Code student with National Resource for Network Biology. I also maintain their one product and Alibaba Cloud's one product. As Ayush mentioned, like we together have filed three patents. And I guess that's pretty much about it. So let me give a short introduction for this community Hypnos. What are we and what we do? So we are like, as we mentioned, we are a small community of like young open source enthusiasts who want to step in open source and finding a way. So we kind of pave a way for them so that they can step their foot in open source. And uh, what else do we do here? Like we arrange these sessions for them. And Ayush,
Yeah,
what
like
else?
we give them a head start. Like if they are a fresher, they want to start with open source, then we give them a head start. That where should they first contribute? What are these organizations? How can they approach to any project or any community? Things like that. Also, we also enhance their skill set, like basic communication skills or any tech stack. We arrange mentors from different organizations, and uh, we actually interact with them on a regular basis. Also, we conduct doubt sessions on a regular basis on our Discord server. So students, if they had any particular doubt at any day, then we are there to help them. Sahil, can you add something?
Nothing else, I guess. So, Logan, can we get a quick introduction of yours? We are very
Yeah,
excited.
no, that was awesome. You guys are both seem like you're killing it. So I'm happy to be here and hopefully share some perspective for everybody. So at the present moment, I wear a number of hats. I think in this presentation, I'm the community manager for the Julia language, but I also am presently a contractor at NASA working on a project. I'm a full-time software engineer at Apple and a graduate student and a teaching fellow at Harvard. So too many things going on right now. Need to stop doing so much, but that's sort of the pandemic for me at least has been that there's no FOMO because no one's doing anything fun. So I can sort of just sit in my room and do all the things that I want to do without feeling bad about missing out on the fun stuff that happens in real life. So once things get back to normal, I'll have to scale back on how much I'm doing. But that's sort of a high level of all the things I have my hands in at the moment.
Only thing that I have achieved in this lockdown is weight gain. Apart from that, nothing else.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
that's a tough one to avoid.
Yep. So, how shall we proceed? Do you have a slide prepared, or shall we proceed with the questions that we have prepared?
That's a great question. I mean, I have some slides if in the context of like introducing folks to Julia, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily the lens that we want to approach this through, or just like a general chat about open source. So I'm happy to frame things through the context of Julia, or we can just chat generally about open source and careers and all that good stuff.
What we
Uh,
can do is what we can do is chat about open source generally, and then if the time allows, we can set the context about Julia. Ayush?
yeah, that's what I was thinking, that we should move ahead with the questions first, and then in the last, maybe we can introduce Julia and everything else.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. The first question from our community. So how did you start your journey in open source? And like, according to you, what path should a beginner like me or anyone should follow if he
Yeah, that's a
wants
good.
to start? Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that's sort of the hardest part that a lot of people have is, figuring out where the right place to get started is and whatever the community is. So I started sort of my open source journey when I was doing my first internship with NASA, and we were using the Julia programming language. And I just sort of out of necessity needed to get engaged with the open source community because Julia is an open source project and it was so new at the time. It hadn't even hit its 1.0 release that, I just had a ton of questions that I needed folks to answer and issues that I had to raise. So I sort of started to get involved with that and made contributions as I needed to out of necessity for my project. And then I actually really started to get more involved through Google Codin. So the Julia language was one of the mentoring organizations for Google Codin, which is formerly Google's sort of GSOC for high school students. And there was just a lot of work that had to be done, and I happened to be there at the right place at the right time and stepped in to fill a lot of the gaps that existed there. So we ended up mentoring, 212 students, and it was a huge success. And then that sort of led to me being able to be selected for my community manager role. And now I do a ton of open source stuff and contribute across a bunch of other packages and all that good stuff. But I think, again, back to the question, the tricky part for figuring out what the best way to get started is, I think it really depends on the community. So you can, I sort of know what I would suggest folks to do in the Julia community, but I think before you sort of dive into whatever the project is and try to get started contributing, take like a half hour, an hour, and just sort of browse around the general ecosystem, try to get a sense of, the people who are involved, what the forms of communication they're using, all of those things, and then get in contact with them, see if they have a contributing guide, follow the contributing guide. If they don't, those are some of the best opportunities to make contributions. Like say, hey, I'd love to, I've done some work with these other open source projects, or here are some contributing guides that I think are really good. You want me to help you make one for your project? And more often than not, open source people are happy to have you do work for them. So they will say yes.
Cool.
Yeah, true.
So for you, it was like kind of giving back to the community at first.
Not even giving back to the community. I was there selfishly. I had questions that I needed answered because I had deadlines to meet, and I was like, please help me with this stuff because I don't know what the answer is, or I can't find what I'm looking for. So people were willing to help me, and I think you just sort of that, in my opinion at least, a lot of the first interactions with open source that people have is a lot of times like a take. Everyone needs something, and then as you take, you sort of learn things, and then that's where you can actually start giving back to whatever the project is.
I have a kind of a similar story. When I was working with Alibaba Cloud, I had no idea about the tech stack on which I am working. Then there was one internal tool that I needed to use, and I literally had no idea. So I just jumped into community for selfish reasons, like answer this question, answer this query. I need to do this, and in that process, I encountered some issues. Like, okay, this can be better, this can be fixed. So that's how I started like giving back to that community, that particular community. So I think it will be
And the
helpful
key,
for others.
taking from the community in such a way that you don't upset people, because if you come in, you're like I don't care about your project, I just need my questions answered. Like if you're not respectful about it, if you're not, if you don't have the realization that everybody who's doing open source stuff, like 99%, they're doing it for free, they're not getting anything out of it, they just like programming. So they might not get to your issue, your question fast. And I've seen people do that where, they open an issue and they're bumping it like 12 hours later, like, hey, is anyone going to help me with this? I'm like, dude, it's open source. People aren't getting paid for this. You need to pump the brakes a little bit. So it's something to keep in mind.
It's all about patience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's move
But,
forward
but
with the next question.
But that's the
Uh,
thing I actually love about open source is that even they have their full-time job and they are doing this for the part-time, but they eventually they are into the community itself. Like they want to help others, they want others to get engaged in that community. So my mentor helped me with that. So basically now it's my time to give back to the community, and that's what I'm doing. So moving to the next question. So my question is, what role did open source played in your professional career? Because we know this is not a full time, this is part time, but a lot of students in India are really concerned about the job. What are the job scenarios? These projects will eventually help them to get a job. So my question is about that.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and definitely something that's changing as time goes on. Where open source contributions are starting to be more and more valued when it comes to applying for a job. I think it's entirely dependent on the company that you're applying for and sort of what role you're looking for. Um, but if you're active in open source, there's definitely ways to leverage that to get a job or an internship for that matter. I think for me, it didn't necessarily have I think for me, the value that open source had for me was that I got a chance to connect with other people and meet other people in a community and get experience with Git workflows and fixing merge conflicts and all of the host of sort of the software development lifecycle. Those are sort of the things, because at least for me, the projects that I was involved with, my first experience, like first internship experience at NASA, it was more focused on like the research aspects of it. So we weren't going through, we weren't writing unit tests, we weren't doing all that sort of stuff. So, and those are sort of the classic examples of like how you can contribute to open source, write some unit tests for a project or whatever, and get involved in that way. So it wasn't as much of a benefit for me, but I think now if I were to go in, to a job interview at whatever company it is, some of the questions that people ask, like one of the classic ones is, what's one of the greatest technical challenges you've had to solve, or what's something you've built that you really liked? How would you rebuild it if you could build it again? Questions like that. Open source experiences make the most sense because you can actually talk about them. Like I can't ever talk about any of the stuff that I work on at Apple. So, I'm void of a talking point in an interview, and I can talk about like when I interviewed at Shopify for an internship, they asked for a link to a project that I'd worked on, and I sent it to them. And then during the actual interview, we went through my code, and they were like, "Wow, you're really bad at programming. We probably shouldn't hire you." That's not what they said, but that's I didn't get the internship, so that's what they must have thought. No, but I mean, that really is the values. You have something that you can actually point to, and people can see what your work really is.
Yeah. One thing I would like to add is that even if you are in college or school, you don't get really access to those large code bases that are actually used in the industry itself. So even if you are working in a team, you are working with your colleagues or classmates, you don't get that diverse team also. So I think open source opened that door for us as a student. There was opportunity to work on a larger code base and to really understand how things are connected to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I agree entirely.
Apart from that, networking is a great aspect of open source. Like networking opens a lot of new opportunities for you. Okay, you met a new guy or new girl. She might be working at a project she might need help with. So, like, if you can understand what I'm trying to say, is like the more people you meet, the more doors you open for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So, shall we move ahead?
Yep.
This is a kind of a technical question. Like, how do you suggest that someone should approach a new project or code base? Let's say I land at a Julia repository myself, and then what should I look for first?
Yeah, I think Perhaps it makes more sense to not do a Julia repository just because we'll have to get into the weeds. But I think my sort of general approach is read through whatever is in the repository as far as documentation or the README goes, figure out how I can run things, get the code on my computer, and try running it. And you can almost, this is how you can almost get free instantaneous open source contributions. Is most people, or unless it's a really big, well-known open source project, just the usage or getting started guide is probably not very good. So if you go and try to download the code on your computer and make things run and you have problems or you have to jump through hoops or you have to look things up, those are all things that should probably be in the README, or they should be in the getting started guide. So you can use all those things to get open source contributions, get started with the project. And then if I'm actually going to be actively developing, probably taking a look at unit tests is the best way. You can get an idea of how data is being passed around through the code, what sort of the important pieces are. If there's a unit test, one can assume potentially that it's an important part of the code base. If there's not a unit test, maybe it's less important, or it's a supporting functionality. So that's sort of my framework, at least at the moment. But it changes for projects.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Ayush, you want to
Depending on
add?
the tech stack.
Yeah, documentation definitely is the first thing I think we should look at, because there are several things that you don't really understand when you look at the code for the first time. So you should at least know what the project is all about and what the aim of the project is, so that you can dive into the code base. And there also you have the comments and everything. There is developer documentation, there is documentation for the user as well, so you can look at both. So also trying out the project is another thing.
Yep, the most of the projects have a very buggy installation process, or this can be also new contribution that let's say the project is supported currently for Ubuntu 18.04. You can add support for 20.04. This is like not much of a hassle, but it's a valuable contribution for them. Okay, shall we move ahead?
Yeah.
So this question is regarding community, like how to maintain a good communication with the community or a team that are you associated with. So like this question is all about the importance of communication in the community.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I think especially for open source, in a lot of cases, you might not know the people in real life. You might not have ever seen them. You might not ever talk. Like, I know a lot of folks who I've worked with for 2+ years who I've never been on a video call with. I've never talked synchronously with them. It's always been, we're talking on Slack, we're talking through GitHub issues or on Discourse or whatever it is. So you have to be very aware of how you're communicating based on what the medium of communication is. It's definitely a challenge. I also think, again, this goes back to understanding how the community communicates. So in Julia, for example, we have a Slack workspace. So many folks in the community are all within this massive Slack workspace with like 10,000 people in it. So if you have a question or you want to get a hold of someone, a maintainer, and you want to talk synchronously, that's where Slack comes into play. But it's definitely a challenge. I also think it depends on your role in the community. I think when I first get started with things, I try not to ping individual folks. I try to make it as general and as broad as I can. Like if I can start with a Stack Overflow question and then go down to maybe whatever the specific forum is for the project or the language or the tech tool, and then go to a GitHub issue. So sort of going from the most broad thing, which I think is Stack Overflow, all the way down to pinging an individual person saying, hey, I have a question about this.
Regarding questions, like we have seen this a lot in our community as well. Like people do not research their questions and just put it in the channel right away. So what would you recommend to them? Like, what process do you follow yourself, like, before asking a question?
Yeah, that is a good one. I just saw something about this on Twitter recently. There's like an acronym that um, people who aren't kind use when someone asks like a really simple question that they probably should have just Googled themselves, and I forget what the acronym is. Um, but I think in my opinion, being a good developer is all about being able to Google things and look things up. Like whenever I talk with, my little brother who's studying computer science, or even my mom is taking computer science classes before. That's sort of the biggest discrepancy that I see across people who are learning to program is how long you're willing to spend, what you're willing to look up, how you're looking things up. Those are sort of the biggest differences. So I always just try to impart that wisdom onto other people. You ask me a really basic question, how do I print something in Julia? I say, here's the link for where you should go to learn about that. And perhaps like, trying to do it in a kind way, saying, here's what you should potentially look up, or here's where you should look next time. And that way, hopefully they can use these resources. Or perhaps, if you're a maintainer or an organizer of this project, perhaps this is a blind spot. I like seeing people's questions that are simple, because it makes me sit there and think, is it something that we're doing wrong? Like, have we not made this information available to people? Or is it that they just didn't look it up and they came here first? And how can we ask people to, whether it's a Slack bot or whatever it is, how can we try to direct people to ask their questions or look their questions up before they come here?
Yep. Yeah.
Like kind of a feedback system before asking questions, a pre-feedback.
And that's hard to do. That exists on Stack Overflow, and that exists on Discourse to some effect, and actually that exists in GitHub issues. But when you get into these sort of real-time communication mediums like Slack or Discourse, or whatever, the Zulip, Matterhorn, or whatever, none of those have that system built in. So you sort of have to manually do it, and that's the challenge with those synchronous platforms, and that's why Discourse and Stack Overflow exist.
The acronym
Yeah.
you were looking for, is it Google is your friend? GIYF.
That sounds like a kind acronym. Google is your friend sounds right. The one that I remember was not as kind. It wasn't vulgar, but it actually might have been vulgar. I don't even know, but I haven't seen anyone actually use it. I've just seen people talk about it on Twitter. So thankfully, the communities I'm part of are more welcoming and kind, I guess.
There's one more unpopular opinion, like do not ask to ask. So what are your views on this thing? Like you shouldn't ask that, hey, any Java developer here, or hey, any React Native developer here. So how would you like frame your questions in this case?
Say that one more time for me. Are you
Like there's a famous ideology on internet that you shouldn't ask questions to ask question. Like in the community, I shouldn't say that, are there any Java developers here? I need help with something.
Yeah. Instead of something, you should ask the actual question.
The-
So
because
Yeah.
people think that their question might be very stupid, or like it's a very silly question. So they are afraid of posting the questions in the open channel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
how
that's a
would
tough
someone
one.
overcome this?
Yeah. For me, I have stopped. Um, I think the realization that like what you do on the internet, bar a bunch of terrible things don't really have consequences. Like nobody really cares. So I always use that as sort of my confidence boost to, reach out to that person, ask that question, post whatever it is. Like again, it doesn't really matter unless you're posting something that's terrible, and then obviously you should not do that. But no one really cares. Someone might see that and be like, "Wow, that's a dumb question," and then move on with their life. And then, I mean, they're not going to say it to you unless, again, it's an unwelcoming community. So I think that sort of, maybe not caring is the wrong way, but that's sort of blind optimism that somebody will answer your question, I think is the right way to approach things.
All right.
So moving ahead, this is actually a continuation of the previous questions. The question is, there are different ways of contributing to any community. I know code contribution is just one part of that, but there is a million other things that you can do for the community itself in terms of contribution. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's something that gets missed out on a lot. So in my role as the community manager for the Julia language, it is a purely by design non-technical role. So while I make technical contributions in my free time, and I'm a software engineer, my specific role with the Julia language, all of my contributions to the open source community are non-technical in fashion. So I'm not a core developer on the actual language itself. I focus on, all of the higher level stuff, making experiences better, finding the resources for people, connecting people, inclusion and diversity, all of these high level initiatives that have nothing to do with technical contributions, but have everything to do with, the community and how the open source project functions itself. So there's definitely a need for all of these things. I sort of am a jack of all trades in what I do right now, where I contribute to all of these different facets, but even some of these individual components, like, help spread the word through, going to events for underrepresented communities in technology, and spread the word about whatever the project is that you're involved in. And that's an open source contribution, even though you're not getting any activity on your GitHub, unless you're smart and then you make a repo and then you commit the link inside of there. That way you get your contribution activity still. But yeah, I think it's an awesome thing to do. And there's so many different ways. And just ask whatever the community is or whatever the project is, just ask them, be like, hey, are there other things I can help out with other than fixing issues for the project? And more often than not, someone will be like, yeah, sure. And that's how I got started with my role with the Julia language. This Google Coding opportunity came up. I wasn't building anything. I was literally just helping students. And that led to everything else that I've been able to do since then.
You can even take classes on Julia online. That will also count as a contribution, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yep. So let's move ahead. As you are associated with Julia for a really long time and you have seen the community grow. So what changes did you observe? Like right now, like Julia is a pretty much stable state. So what were the changes in the community? Like, were they good?
Yeah.
The bad changes? Like, yeah, okay, sure.
That's a great question. I think I sort of have only been super active in the community probably for the last year and a half, 2 years maybe. Before that, I was more a consumer of the language and all of the content and stuff like that. So Julia's been around since 2012, so I don't have the best insight as far as 2012 to now. But just in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, the language in 2018 hit its 1.0 release, and things have since stabilized since then. Before then, your code was always breaking. So that's been something different. And I think prior to 2018, 2012 to 2018, so much of the focus was on getting the language to a stable state where everybody would be happy. And then since then, the core developer team, at least, has been able to go on and solve all of these problems that, people would be like, I don't want to use Julia because the time to first plot, which is this thing that you don't think about unless you're in the Julia community, but supposedly people are upset that when you do your first plot, it takes a long time because it has to pre-compile the plots package and do all this stuff on the back end, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. But that was one of the things that people were upset about. So now the core developer community has been able to go and solve that problem with Julia 1.6. So you just see these ease of use things being solved and people being happy. And that sort of has transcended to, I saw one of the core developers in the last few weeks was talking about, he was like, I don't know, I don't have any data to back this up. But just from like what I've been seeing, he thinks that the Julia community has, sort of doubled in its awesomeness or level of success just in the last like 2 months, which is very interesting to see him say. And I think that's partially because of a lot of the success that some of the Julia packages and different ecosystems have been having. Like just today, the SciML ecosystem, which is basically it started off as just a differential equations package and has sort of developed into this whole scientific machine learning ecosystem. The guy who created it, they also have a company called Pumas AI, and Pumas AI entirely built with Julia as the code for all of the models and stuff. They helped work on the Moderna COVID vaccine, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, and Julia is enabling all this stuff to happen, which is, leading to a lot of success for people involved in the community, which is awesome to see.
So as the community grows, it kind of builds confidence in the people, and the ecosystem around itself also gets motivated to build some really cool stuff. Like they might have not done it individually or as a community
Yeah.
itself, but the what I'm trying to say is evolution of third-party packages
Yeah.
happens very fast when your core community is like growing rapidly.
Yeah, and that's sort of been one of the deterrents for people to learn Julia, was that, Python and R and all these other languages, you have a bunch of world-class packages that have been around for the better part of 5 or 8 years, and Julia now has, a few that are competitive with those Python or R world-class packages, which is helping a ton with acceptance of Julia.
Yep.
So moving ahead, what are the things basically you as a mentor expect from a new contributor who wants to contribute to your project? Like for us, we as a student expect that the mentor will help us to understand the code base, will give us something to start with, like good first issues or any other thing, and maybe they can help us to fix that issue. These are the things we as a student expect from mentor. But what are the point of view of mentor that they expect something from us? Like they really want us to first read out the documentation or research a bit about the issue itself or try it out, these things. What are your views on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's sort of a reverse question perhaps, but as a mentor, the things that I'm looking for should, as a mentor, a good mentor, you should always state what you're expecting from somebody who you're mentoring. And that should actually be, from the mentee's point of view, that should be the filtering mechanism. Like if I state a bunch of things and you as the mentee are like, well, that doesn't seem reasonable to me. Either saying that to the person like, hey, I don't know if I'm able to do whatever this thing is that you're asking me to do. I think that people too often just find someone to be their quote unquote mentor for whatever it is, and then they just run with it. And I think you should spend a little bit more time, find someone who actually has time to help you. Because Ayush, in the example that you just gave, like going through the code base with you, I feel like I've mentored a lot of people, and I don't think I've ever like hopped on a Zoom call and like gone through a code base with somebody. And maybe that's because I'm a bad mentor. I'm not sure, but so making sure that the expectations on both sides sort of align. But I think the big thing that I'm always looking for in somebody who I'm going to be spending my time with is, they sort of have to be enthusiastic about whatever it is, and they have to be willing to spend the time to make something meaningful happen. Everything else, doesn't really matter. I don't really care how much you know or what you did in the past. Just as long as you're excited about it, and I'm also excited about it, that's usually a recipe for success.
One thing that I like to observe in the new contributors in my project is like, are they going to stay, or they will run after this pull request? They'll run abandon their project and just leave it here unattended. So, like, what sort of thing that you look in a contributor that tells you that this guy is not going to stay?
Those are the things. So on the Julia language website, for Google Summer of Code, we actually outline some of the outcomes that we would want. And one of the things, at least in the context of Google Summer of Code, is that we want people to stick around. So we're trying to find people who are going to be long-term contributors to the community, because those are sort of the best people to invest your time into. But it's very tough to get a feel for all those things. Again, it depends on how you're approaching it, but I think people ping me on Slack and they're like, hey, I'm going to go tackle this issue. Like, will you help me out if I have questions? And I say yes. So that's sort of like, I don't know, I think of that as quote unquote mentoring. That's sort of more hands off. But I sort of don't even think about it's all about, from a mentor's point of view, it's all about how much time you're putting into it. So in that case, I sort of am not investing any time. They're just saying, hey, if I have questions, I'm going to come to you. But if I have to be more hands-on, if I have to be involved, then those things like, what is this person really here for? Those questions start to come in more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, during my first year of GSOC, I was having some trouble fixing one issue, and my mentor, actually, we took a 2 hour call, and he literally explained each line of the code base to actually get familiar with the code base. And that was really inspiring for me, as how mentors are really doing things for the student to actually excel in their code base or for their project. And that's really inspiring for me as well.
And so you got a good mentor.
Yeah.
and that's what it's about, honestly. And I think even with Google Summer of Code, you see this all the time. I'm an org admin for the Julia language for Google Summer of Code, so I don't actually mentor students, but I just sort of look at things from a high level. And if you look at the reason why students fail Google Summer of Code, more often than not, it's because the mentor wasn't actively engaged. And I know it's supposed to be student driven or whatever, but if the mentor is absent and not helping the person, that's a recipe for a student failing Google Summer of Code.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move forward. I think that you have sort of answered this question in the beginning, but still I'm going to ask this. So what's your motivation behind this diverse work experience that you have got?
Yeah, I think it's a personality flaw, perhaps. I am just sort of intrigued by everything. I continuously, even when I'm busy, and I think this is sort of a self-deprecating personality trait, but I also think it has a lot of benefits as well. Even when I'm content, even when I'm happy with all the things that I'm working on and all the projects that I'm involved with, if I see something cool, I still reach out to the people. I'm gainfully employed right now, but if I see a cool project and they're hiring people, I will always send them an email and be like, hey, I think this is really interesting, and I'd love to talk more, because you never know what's going to happen, and I think that's just the way that life works. So I've sort of made that my continual habit of reaching out to people, getting more involved in as many things as I can, and eventually, I think what I personally need to do better at is understanding like what my exit strategy is for whatever it is that I'm getting into, and I sort of don't have that right now. But it's almost 2021, so maybe I'll make a New Year's resolution or something like that. I'm not sure.
That checks out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that's really inspiring. You're doing so many things. And when, for the first time, I looked at your LinkedIn, I was like, wow, this man can do everything.
That's the goal is to do everything. I mean, you only have what, like 70 years or something. So I'm trying to do as much as I can before I kick the can. So
But it's again like you only have 24 hours in a day. When I try to do something similar, I get like really kind out. I mess up at everything I do.
I,
So
the piece that works for me is one, you sort of have to build your lifestyle for it. So I think I've been lucky enough that we could talk for a long time about this, but you sort of have to set your life up to do a ton of stuff and then it sort of works. And the other piece is I don't think I would ever be able to work 80 hours a week at one job. I just, that sounds terrible. But I think what I can do is work 80 hours a week on 4 different jobs. And I think the different context and like, I work full time as a software engineer. I can step away from that and I can go do Julia community stuff, which is just entirely different. And then I can go and be a teaching fellow at Harvard and I can teach people and, it's still software engineering stuff, but it's almost completely different from what I do in my full-time job and what I do for the Julia language. So the different contexts sort of help me not get burnt out.
so yes, now I see the flaw. Like the stuff that I'm trying to do has the similar context. Like all of the stuff is related to each other.
Yeah. And again, I think the way you sort of have to more loosely thread the things together. Like I think in some sense, all the things are related because they're all related to technology and computer science, and they're all sort of pushing that idea forward. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, what I'm actually doing for all of them is different.
Got it. So
Yep.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
I will definitely change my lifestyle. During this lockdown, my whole lifestyle got messed up, and that's a long story.
On the note of programs, so what are the different programs or opportunities in open source that might benefit students and as well as community?
Yeah. So in the context of the Julia language, you have the Google Summer of Code, Google Season of Docs is a huge one. I can't say enough that being able to write well in a technical context, just being able to write in general is such a powerful thing to have and know how to do. So I think Google Season of Docs is another awesome program the Julia language is involved in. All of the MLH programs that they've since started in the last year, the Julia language is involved in those. Those are really cool. And then we actually, as an organization, we provide supplemental funding for Google Summer of Code and Google Season of Docs. So if you apply for GSOC with the Julia language and you're not accepted, but you're still have a really strong application and you've done Julia open source contributions, every year we put aside a pool of money. We actually pay people directly to do the work that they propose for GSOC. So just like GSOC, same timeline, same expectations. You're just paid through us rather than directly through Google. So those are sort of the high level ones. And I think for people who are interested in doing that, that's the best time to get started is yesterday, but the second best time to get started is today. So get involved, make some contributions. And that's sort of what people are looking for when they're selecting GSOC students. Has this person done open source contributions? Specifically, have they done open source contributions in our community? And if you've done both of those, you're probably in a really good position.
Apart from Julia, we have programs like Outreachy, Gnome Summer of Code, KD Season of Code. Like there are really a lot of them. Like they are just literally a Google search away.
Yeah.
So, so okay, let's move forward.
Okay, so according to you, what are the common mistakes that students make in community, like in open source community. For an example, I will give you that you have already stated that already, but I would like to point it out. Like, student really ask the question to directly to the mentor, not in the general channel, and this question might benefit others as well. So mentors are really pissed off that this question is like in general and other people might get benefit from it. So without being selfish, they go directly to the mentor. So what are the things that you should recommend student to avoid when they are in a open source community?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think maybe this is a pet peeve for me, but I don't like getting emails. I don't know why. It just, I feel like there's so many, I'm sort of active on so many online platforms that when I get an email, I feel like it's, I don't know. It's, again, this might just be me personally. I think that going, as you said, Ayush, going through all of the stuff online first, trying to, follow whatever the procedure in question is, and then after you've done all those things, if you do reach out to the mentor specifically, either A, have some specific ask for them, like, okay, I've done all this stuff, is there, what's a good next step for me? If it's not outlined, that's a perfectly valid question, and perhaps I am the right person for you to ask that question to. So send the email, send the direct message. That's awesome. But making sure it's a specific question, and making sure you've done all of the other stuff that it's an expectation that you've done before you reach out. I think often, and I see this every year with Google Summer of Code, we have like a general JSOC at julialang.org, and people will just email the email and say, hey, I'm interested in Google Summer of Code. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, thanks for emailing us. But like, what do you want us to say when you send us that email? So I think that's a smaller percentage of students that do that. But again, I think the biggest thing, even though I said I don't like getting emails, the biggest thing, the difference between students who get accepted into GSOC and the ones who don't, at least for the Julia language, is people who don't communicate with the mentors don't get chosen. Even if you've done Julia contributions, even if you have a strong application, if you didn't reach out to the mentor and say, hey, I'm interested, here's my proposal, is there anything else you think I should do? Those people still oftentimes don't get chosen because the mentor is sort of, surprised that there's this application in there when all these other people have been in contact with them.
Not just Julia, this applies for my org and Ayush org as well. I think this applies for every other org. Like, if you haven't communicated your proposal with your mentor, then there are slightly less chances for getting accepted in the program. Again, that it circles back to the question how communication is important in the community.
Yeah.
So let's move ahead. Oh, it's my turn. So so what advice would you give to your younger self, like in the context of professionalism?
That is a good one. I think that too often people you sort of hear, when you hear about success and getting jobs and all this stuff, it's this one definition, and it's whatever it is, get success as a developer is working at Google. And the reality is that that's not the case. My sort of advice to myself would have been if you can find specific niches, that's where you're going to have the most success. In everything you do in life, finding specific niches. I think everything that I've done, that I've been a part of, has been some less traditional niche opportunity. I think being involved as the Julia community manager, that role it sort of existed before I had it, but it wasn't a thing. I'm a full-time software engineer at Apple. Before I was a full-time software engineer at Apple, I worked at the Apple retail store, which is like not the sexy, exciting, fun thing to do. But I thought it was a super valuable experience for me. And all the people that I met there, who, you know, a lot of them ended up working as engineers at Apple in a corporate setting. I had all those connections, and that was sort of my niche to get into the role that I have there. And even at NASA, my very first internship, the way that I was able to get it was just by reaching out to folks on LinkedIn, and I got lucky that somebody answered and gave me an internship offer. But all of those things I would consider to be outside the bounds of like what is normal to do. Like most people, you know, they're like, oh, go, you know, just apply on the website, send your application into the black void, and then never hear back again. And I've definitely done my fair share of that, but you sort of have to try all these different things and try to find what these niches are, and then be the best person in the world. I this sort of pseudo philosopher that I spent too much time listening to one of their podcasts talked a lot about this, that you want to be the best person in the world. Like the idea is, if you're a good Java developer, that's awesome. You're now competing against every other good Java developer in the world for job prospects and all the opportunities that come for that. I want to be the best Julia community manager in the world. That's easy because it's just me. So I don't really have to compete against anybody. And by default, I've now become the best one in the world. So finding opportunities like that, where then you can take that experience and leverage it in other ways, is hands down, if I could reverse time, I would have found more niches early on and been involved in those things.
That was really inspiring.
Yeah,
So,
really motivating.
Ayush, so what advice would you give yourself?
I'm still young, so I think I'll save it up for 5 years later. So
Find your niche, Ayush. Find your niche, man.
yeah,
It might be this.
but
This could be your guys. This could be your guys' niche. I think whatever you don't really know necessarily in a lot of cases, but
yeah, I think in the life of student, in 4 years of engineering, we are still exploring different things, and we don't know much more things that might be ahead in the future. So it's the right time to explore, I guess.
yeah, that's very
Yeah,
true.
like we have a senior and he has a quote like, whenever you are in engineering, flirt with all the technologies and marry one.
Anyone, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's
So
exactly it. But don't marry Java, because then you're going to still have to compete against 7 million
Oh
other Java
God.
developers. So fine, go learn like Pascal or something that no one programs in. I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but there's some really old language that nobody develops in anymore.
COBOL, I guess.
Cobalt,
Uh,
yeah. There's like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
shortage of Cobalt developers in the world because no one knows it, no one
No one
wants to
knows.
learn it, and they get paid really well. And I'm like, those are the niches that you want to be in.
It happened because the banking systems used COBOL, and when they were really stressed out, they needed COBOL developers, and there were none really.
Never done. Yeah.
Should learn
Yep.
Cobalt. Darn it.
So you have already said so much. You have already given too much of advice for us. But this is our last question. So, any last piece of advice you would like to give us for the students or any other student that might be watching this podcast?
Yeah. I think the best thing that you can do is reach out to everybody, send every cold message, send every Twitter DM, get on Twitter if you're not on Twitter. Best platform. LinkedIn's not as good. Um, get on there, connect with people, send messages, cause chaos. Something good's going to happen.
It's like, don't be shy. Reaching out to people doesn't cost a penny.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess that's it from our side. So can you share your slides now about Julia?
Yeah. Let me pull it up. Are you guys able to see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Yep, it's visible.
Cool. So this is an outreach presentation that I did. a few weeks ago. So I'm going to breeze through it. And just for those who aren't familiar with Julia or why you would want to learn Julia, this will hopefully provide a good context. So sort of for the last 25, 30 years, as long as programming has been commonplace in scientific domains, you sort of have the workflow of the scientists would use these high-level programming languages like Python, R, MATLAB. They would do all their development, and then once they came to the solution, they would hand off that information to computer scientists, or in reality, software engineers, who would then take what they built in the high-level language, convert it down to C++, C#, Java, C, whatever it is, and then that information or the product would be deployed. And this, if you're familiar with it, has been referred to as the two-language problem, where you sort of need a language to do the development, and then you need a language to actually deploy the product or some variation of that. And that's sort of where this initial problem and what Julia set out to solve. So all the people who created Julia started the language at MIT in 2012. They sort of came together and were like, how can we build a language that is fast, expressive, reproducible, and we don't have to pay for a MATLAB subscription? So they were like, well, let's build a language ourselves. And that's sort of where things have come. So now you can do all your development in a high-level language like Julia, which has syntax that's similar to Python and R. And then you can actually, because it's so fast, it's at the speed on the order of C, you can actually deploy Julia in whatever the domain is. And now you don't have to waste as much time and money rewriting your code to make it fast. So the Julia community has been growing exponentially over the last 8 years. A lot of the stuff that it's focused on is more like scientific computing. So in the example I gave earlier, where Moderna is using Julia, they're doing a lot of numerical computing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, math stuff. But Julia also has a lot of applications in more general programming domains. 17 million downloads, 10,000 daily downloads. I didn't even know that. I forgot that I wrote that. 4,000 packages, tons of stuff. Everything's open source. A lot of really awesome educational resources. MIT this semester actually partnered with a bunch of famous YouTubers. So one of them being 3 Blue, 1 Brown. And they actually made the materials for the Introduction to Computational Thinking class for MIT with the help of people who make YouTube videos for a living, which was super awesome to see, and a great job by MIT and the folks at the MIT Julia lab. Julia's used at a ton of companies. I started using Julia when I was interning at NASA, still use it there. And it's used across a broad spectrum of companies for a bunch of different applications. It's taught at a bunch of universities. People have great things to say about Julia. If you go on Google News or whatever and look up Julia, you'll see a bunch of clickbaity articles talking about how Julia's fast and awesome and really great. But it is. If you give it a shot, you'll see. Julia also, a lot of the domains now is a lot of stuff focused on machine learning and AI and differential programming. So I'll share a link to these slides after we're done. And if you all want to check out some of the YouTube videos and stuff, there's a lot of really interesting stuff. But sort of a few of the projects that really put Julia on the radar, this Celeste project, essentially Julia was able to do some things that very few other programming languages are able to do. Julia is in the petaflop club, which is not something that is commonplace. I think there's only 2 other languages that have been able to, performance-wise, achieve what Julia has been able to achieve. So that's really awesome. These next 2 things, these are sort of like the applications of Julia that really get me excited. So the Klima project is a collaboration between Caltech, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, MIT, and a bunch of other places. And they're actually trying to build, sort of one of the fundamental problems with climate change is the Earth is such a dynamic and complex system that we don't know what's happening. We can do something, we can remove all carbon emissions, for example, but we don't really know how that's going to affect the planet and what the impact of that is. So the Klima project is going out to actually build real world models of the entire planet, which is crazy, and it's super ambitious. But they're using Julia as sort of the backbone of this new infrastructure and approach that they're taking to climate modeling. So super cool project. I had a chance to go down there in 2019 and see some of the stuff that they were doing. It was really awesome. And then the other project that's really cool is the Pumas project, which I alluded to earlier. So they were doing, the project sort of started off as they're trying to do basically personalized medicine. So you go to your doctor, you and I, or all of us on the call, we all go to the doctor, we all have the same symptoms, we're all diagnosed the same thing, and we're all given the same prescription of whatever the drug is. And the reality is, all of our bodies are interacting with the drug differently. We all weigh different amounts, we're all different heights, we all have different lifestyles, but we're all still given the same amount of a medicine, which just makes no sense. So the Pumas project, that's sort of one of the applications. They're hoping to do this personalized medicine in real time based on a bunch of things about you. You can go in your doctor's office and then get a personalized drug dose. And there's a ton of other case studies. You can go check this out. We talked about this earlier, but sort of Julia has a few world-class packages. So the JUMP package for operations research, Flux for deep learning and machine learning, and then differential equations, which is sort of bridged into the SciML ecosystem. There's, those are all world-class packages, and you're able to do things in those that you cannot do in Python. And that sort of enabled a lot of the really cool things that we saw earlier with Pumas, Klima, and the Celeste project. So again, lots of cool opportunities to get involved with Julia through GSOC, JSOC, Google Summer of Code, and all that. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in those. That's my quick spiel.
Julia seems really exciting. We should give it a shot, right, Ayush?
Yeah, I think that climate project is really similar to one of our projects, so maybe we can try Julia in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
things will probably speed up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we are done here.
So thank you, Logan, for attending the session. The discussion was really helpful and inspiring. I hope this will really help the student and motivate them to get into the open source world. And lastly, it was our honor to host you today, and we know your time is precious, and we are grateful that you shared some of it with us. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again.